Good morning, everyone. It's fascinating to be here in this very stimulating Congress environment, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting me and to say a few words also on behalf of the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, or the Dutch Research Council, NWO. And indeed, I have chosen a little bit of a provocative title, and I'm going to give away the answer to the solution for all societal problems, because I think, or actually I'm convinced that that comes from research and innovation. So that's also the conclusion of my very short lecture today. And I hope you will bear with me that I'm going to start very quickly with this dreadful virus that has been so crucial in our lives for the past 2 years. And I know that people are tired of talking about coronavirus, but this is just to demonstrate how actually research can help us when there is a big societal challenge. It's actually quite interesting that such a tiny particle, and here you can see it's only 1/10,000th of a millimeter, and is relatively simple, is able to put the world completely upside down, as we've seen in the last few months. And you may remember from January 2020, this picture from China, from Wuhan, where people were building in a few days a hospital. And at that time, it felt far away, maybe not something that was going to affect us. But of course, we now know that that was not true. And with a very short period of time, also other parts of the world were overwhelmed with this virus and the consequences. Well, I'm not going to dwell on that. But what I'd like to focus on for today is that only after two and a half weeks after the identification of this epidemic in China, the first publication in the medical literature appeared about this virus, with a lot of detailed information, pictures of the virus, and also a lot of detailed characteristics of the disease. And if you looked at the scientific timetable of everything that happened thereafter, after 2 weeks, it was not only clear which virus was causing the pandemic, but also what this virus did look like. The exact genome of the virus was well known, and it took only another few weeks to understand the infectivity of the virus's architecture, and this formed the blueprints for further vaccine development, which were only 5 months later in clinical trials. And 10 months after the first patients entered the hospital in China, effective vaccines were available and were thereafter implemented throughout the world, or actually, I should be fair and say throughout the Western world, because we still have a very big problem in the rest of the world. But what this is going to show you is that if there is a big need, a big societal problem, research can actually address very quickly what needs to be done and come up with a solution for this particular problem. And that is obviously not only true for infectious diseases. If you take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals as have been formulated by the United Nations, you can actually, without a lot of fantasy, come up with all kinds of ideas how scientific solutions will address each of these Sustainable Development Goals. And it's not only medical or beta science that's going to help us, it's also social sciences and other forms of research that can actually help us to come up with tangible and implementable solutions for all these problems on a national, but also on an international or even a global scale. We at NWO are very keen to contribute to this from our position as research funder in the Netherlands. But of course, there is always a lot of people then who actually say, well, if you do that, would there be room for fundamental science? Because this sounds like you're going to invest only in applied sciences over the next few years. And I think that is a little bit of a misunderstanding. And I'm going to demonstrate that by the next example. This is a very nice picture of a centipede. Actually, in Dutch, it's a duizendpoot. It's already very interesting that in the Netherlands we think it has 1,000 legs, and the rest of the world thinks it has 100 legs. But interestingly, it has no 1,000 legs, it has not even 100 legs, it has less legs. But that's not the point I wanted to make here. You can do very fundamental research in looking why this little animal has in fact so many legs. And that's a fundamental question driven by curiosity, just by shifting the boundary because what we know and what we don't know so far. But if you do this, at the same time, you will yield knowledge that can be very interesting for fields like robotics, mechanics, neuroscience, and rehabilitation. So this antithesis that there seems to be between fundamental and applied sciences, at least in my view, does not exist. It is all points on a spectrum of research where applied sciences will a little bit more quickly come up with answers to specific questions, but where fundamental sciences will also address these questions, but on a much longer timescale with a little bit more uncertainty, and sometimes coming up with very surprising answers to questions that were not even asked. But it is essentially the same. And I hope you do not mind me to give you another example coming from Corona, because you may realize that already more than 35 years, very fundamental research has been performed on mRNAs, on the biology of mRNA and the use of mRNA as a vaccine, actually looking for a cure for cancer. And we all know now that from this knowledge, there was a very applied answer, and this was forming the basis of the COVID-19 vaccines that we are now using and are highly effective in addressing infectivity and disease. And this is actually exactly what happens here at Wetsus. It is a mixture of basic sciences, where most of the input comes from the very applied solutions that take place, and that will address questions, in this case, in water research. And it fits very well with the current thinking on how we can actually do research that is not only interesting and is not only very fundamental, but on the other hand will address the societal challenges that we all have. If I look at the Dutch Research Council and WO, we have many programs, as you probably know. We have the open competition where people can come up with good ideas and then actually can ask for funding. And this is an underfunded part of NWO. It's actually not that because we spend less money, but it's actually because the other parts have grown so much. And in combination with the talent programs where we try to stimulate young people who try to pursue a career in research, this is what we call bottom-up research. But then this has been completely overtaken by top-down programs, and I will give you some examples in the future. And there is nothing wrong with the top-down programs because they will actually very closely link to the societal problems that we want to address with research. But to our taste, they are much too strictly defined. So it is actually quite difficult for people to fit in with precisely within these programs, and they do not take into account the needs of our talents. So if we can convert our top-down problems to be slightly strictly defined, and let's say we are going to study, for example, climate, full stop, and not how do penguins on Antarctica survive, which is now, seriously, one of the research programs we are funding. And we also include talent programs within these top-down programs. I think we bring these worlds a little bit closer to each other. And then, of course, we need to think about funding of research infrastructure. One of the examples of the applied science programs, of the top-down programs, is the Knowledge and Innovation Covenant, the KICs. And this is actually providing economic opportunity for companies, mostly Dutch companies, that develop innovative solutions for societal challenges and forming partnerships between academic partners on one hand and companies and entrepreneurs on the other hand. It's a fairly big program with a lot of finance invested by government into this. There are 4 big themes that you will probably recognize as being part of societal and maybe even national challenges that have to be addressed in the Netherlands, and some intersecting themes. And next to that, we have another program, which is actually a program that is bottom-up from questions that arise in society, the people who actually pay for all that research. And that is the Dutch National Research Agenda. And you will not be surprised that climate, environment and sustainability, including a lot of water research, is part of that program. And I am very happy, and we are very happy if I then look at the research program of Wetsus, which fits very seamlessly in all these different components of NWO funding, in particular in the applied programs, but hopefully in the future also in the bottom-up program. And these are just two examples that they are just titles, but they actually are a very nice demonstration on how you can integrate fundamental applied sciences and address society difficult questions. So we have the ideas here. We have people who can actually do this research. But the question I think we should ask ourselves is, will we be able to accelerate? Because it was quite clear from the speeches we've heard so far, and in particular from Ms. Tyson's speech just before me, that we will need to accelerate because things are going too slowly. And of course, we need to translate all these research findings into practical applications. We need to take into account situational influences, which may be different between countries or continents. And we have to come up with more innovative and original solutions and alternatives to what we are doing now. And I think most people know the direction of travel to address all this. But the big question is, of course, how can we implement this at a more speedy pace than we've been doing so far? Well, one of the answers is probably that we need to integrate different scientific disciplines. So all these answers will not only come from the beta science, from chemistry, but they will also have to involve physics, maybe a little bit of biological sciences, things like ecology, data science, computer sciences, and interestingly, probably also a lot of social sciences, if we think about implementation and human behavior, because these are also important to understand how our fantastic solutions are going to be implemented. And to address all this, I think most people are now convinced that we need to form bridges between these different disciplines and actually try to stimulate multidisciplinary research. If you look at the big scientific journals, then the big steps forward in research are actually now made at the boundaries of the traditional disciplines, which are all moving forward. But if you're able to bridge gaps between these traditional disciplines, then you make real progress at a much higher pace. And the question, of course, is who is going to do all this? And I think the answer to that question is not that difficult. In the first place, nobody on this slide is going to make any significant contribution to this. But the answer, of course, is that all these answers will come from research if we do this in the right way. And I'm very happy that we are now today at a conference of a research institute which is actually exemplary of the way how you do fantastic research on one hand and address societal problems on the other hand. And I'd like to congratulate Wetsus. I'm pretty sure that the future of Wetsus, even financially, is less cumbersome than maybe people believe in the slightly distorted landscape of Dutch national institutes, but there are many, many solutions also for that problem to go. Thank you very much for your attention.